Cool, guys. We have really wanted to chat here on few things, but is there anything in your mind which you want to really look at from this panel? I can flip the process of having a Q&A first, and then kind of really having a rhetorical panel, if that's of interest to you. But any questions, guys? Or you would having a nice sit down after lunch? Anyone? Happy to take question first. What do you want to really listen from this panel? Yes, thank you.
Hello, sir. Welcome. So, what's your thought on startup which are adopting the blockchain technology into their games, and how can one survive in the Indian market?
Are you able to hear him?
Sorry, we can't hear you very well. Can you speak closer to the mic?
Especially the startup who adopting the blockchain technology into their game, and how they could survive the market, especially in India.
Startup which are adopting games which are adopting blockchain, how could they survive?
In this market.
In the market, yeah.
In this market.
Doing the blockchain games.
Go for it, Shahilesh.
Look, I think most people who are building games first have to focus on making fun games. And the market of blockchain or cryptocurrencies and their value and being more or less interest is a little bit of a second order issue. That most people who are building blockchain games today are mostly just focused on building fun games. And they might use crypto or blockchain as a way to store assets or the value layer, but the price of that does not really impact them, as in they're trying to find users. And Manish at IndiGG is the expert of helping those types of companies find users.
Vaas, you want to say it? Come in.
See, I completely agree with that fun part. I think the other thing, I'm sure we'll speak about it in the panel, is I think these are economies in their own right, each game. And I think one of the big things which blockchain games and digital assets getting on chain is we got to figure out the economics. I think we haven't figured out how to run this full open loop economics truly. And maybe quieter markets is a good time for some of this to get figured out, games to figure out how to run these economies, pull in the right talent and do that. So I think one, focus on building the right game, two, focus on what it takes to really build this blockchain value layer, and then things will turn around by then.
Yeah, just to kind of add on, don't try to think a force-fitting blockchain. Focus on how do you get your engagement retention first. Because if you don't have engagement retention, there is no asset ownership use case, there is no secondary market use case. So I think a lot of people in 2021 started leveraging blockchain as a proxy to ride the FOMO around investment. So don't fall for that.
Also, the government implied a tax on the crypto, 30% tax. Any thoughts on that?
So I think don't worry about tax on crypto or India market, because if your game is really going to be successful, it's going to be successful around the globe, and then you can find solutions. I think don't cloud your mind with all the regulatory, statutory, all these things. First, make the game, get users to have fun, get them retained, and then things will flow. Yeah?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I will take this question and use this as a segue to kind of really do it. We saw a lot of excitement 2021 around blockchain gaming. Everybody was kind of talking about it globally, India. And then a lot of events happened. FTX happened, and then Terra happened, and then FTX happened, and suddenly it was gloom and doom all around. So I would love to understand, has there been any shift in your conviction and thesis in last 1 year? What was it 3 years back versus what is it now? Either of you can go first.
There has not, it's not been the market sentiment that's changed our conviction on blockchain and games. I think it's just learning and getting more data points over the past few years. Yeah, look, I think we all know the conceptual reasons that games sell virtual goods. Blockchains are represent virtual goods. So blockchains provide interoperability and provide the ability to have a ledger that sits outside of the game that represents the asset. So there's lots of reasons why, theoretically it makes sense that blockchain could be used in games. I think what we have realized is that the few folks have tried and Firstly, welcome, Justin.
Sorry about that, guys. There was a time change and a bit of a conflict in the schedule, but
No
happy to be here. Sorry about that.
But yeah, we've learned that we've seen a few people attempt basic blockchain games over the past few years, and I don't think all the attempts that will be attempted have come even close to coming out. We're trying to figure out, as Vaas said, just what the right use case of blockchain within a game is. There's some things that users might want that publishers may not want to give that blockchain enables. There's some things that they're just not in. Users may not care. I don't think many users care about decentralization in a lot of senses. That they are willing to have the central party hold their data and be the controller of that. Now, users have not been presented with great options of the alternative yet, and that's why there's still lots of hope in this sector. But we've learned that that some of the core tenets of blockchain really aren't what consumers want, and that applies outside of games very much as well.
Yeah.
So we continue to look a lot at games and blockchain, and we think it's amongst the most interesting set of applications. But we kind of know what doesn't work within this context as well.
Got it. And I'll take you up on what doesn't work for the audience separately. But Vaas.
See, I think first principle, nothing changes. You take a 5-10 year view, you see what's happening in terms of inflection points, right? I think digital assets are very real, like IAP revenues are at par with ad revenues today. Like I speak to my young cousin who's 12, 13-year-old, like a digital good's probably far more valuable to him than anything physical. Like I remember when I was a kid, like a Tazo or something was such a big deal, but like that kid cares more about that armor or something that he has there, right? And like I almost imagine a world where my son who's 2 years old is probably going to make his first big real estate asset purchase in the virtual world. It's not going to be real home or a land or anything. And when you then take what that physical world provides and what the digital world doesn't, which is, that true ownership of the property, composability on top of that, you can lease it out, you can build things on top, somebody else could come and do something on top of that. I think blockchain is the only way to do that. So if you almost imagine a world where digital assets are real, digital assets have as much or more value than in real life assets, and what is the ideal world where all this should exist? It has to be somehow this public ledger led. We'll figure out what those models are and what they are, but nothing changes. Like a 5-10 year view, I would think that's where we probably end up. Given all that, I think the path to that is going to be murky. I think we did see a bunch of these places where the economics were not figured out intentionally, unintentionally. And I think as we go through these cycles, we'll figure out the right models to make it work. And that's where we are. We think it's also some of these quieter times are good. This is when we see the best builders come, take their time, figure out both how to make the game engaging, how to get the economics going, how to make it more usable. And I think it's the right time to be building.
So Justin, just bringing you in, we spoke about first principles, blockchain, asset ownership. It'll play out over the next 5-10 years. The first principle thinking hasn't changed. Shahilesh also mentioned that he's looking at some of the use cases really to emerge. The question for you is, what are the very tangible things which will will be looking out for, which will instill that first principle really playing out? And what could be those demonstration of those events or games or opportunities which will instill that confidence that yes, the theory is now getting into application and we are seeing the real demonstration of that?
Yeah, spot on. I don't think I could have said it better than Vaas. The sort of the stuff that we look at and the core concepts behind things like digital collectibles and the impact of true ownership that will have on a game. But diving deeper, I mean, so gaming in crypto has gone through these phases, right? So phase one, we've kind of seen with weak games, but slightly kind of convoluted token economic structures and an attempt at some kind of game economy. I think that's interesting in terms of perhaps giving a glimpse of the future and what that may hold. And we can have a discussion about that, about sort of empowering time-rich but cash-poor people, gamers, to perhaps service or enable cash-rich but time-poor people. And like I think that you look at the phases of how traditional software and technology businesses have developed over time. What was yesteryear's web van is today's Instacart. What was yesteryear, it goes through these kind of, perhaps not the timing is right, but at least gives it a view of what may come. The phase that we're in now is we need kind of good metrics. That will be the
And what could that metrics be in your opinion?
So traditional, if we just look at mobile kind of games as an example, traditional metrics would be very much the same. But what I think is quite interesting is when we see crypto-enabled games come to market or come to us for funding, some of these retention metrics are so high that they're almost laughable. Now, there's various kind of reasons for this. One is just a lot of botting, given the open nature of crypto games. It just enables, and the high stakes at times that are present in these games, because there's just some kind of reward at play, whether it's sort of some stake in a game's economy, that of course it's going to get botted. And so, we've had to invest in a lot of companies trying to solve for this, because I think that that's probably one of the underappreciated problems in crypto gaming at the moment. I mean, you've seen just heavy levels of botting absolutely destroy games like Crabada on Avalanche, if anyone's sort of familiar with that. The game just got absolutely wiped out by bots. And so, we've had to solve for that kind of stuff. So, but there's, again, interesting nuggets in what's happening there with retention metrics, and that the stuff we find quite interesting is that if you're giving users, whether it's for free or for cheap or just through traditional like user acquisition channels, if users are acquiring, whether for free or paid, some kind of digital collectibles, just slight changes, even a few basis points changes in LTV metrics, in unit economics. If you have like a casual game that just does massive volumes of transactions through its platform, like that's quite interesting. I mean, so we've invested in one or two kind of casual gaming studios that are trying to work with that, which I think could be quite interesting. So anyway, long story short, the way that we think about it is good metrics in terms of player growth, spend, and retention metrics, but with the view that the underlying crypto protocol, economic incentives, whatever it may be, is actually additive to the game, rather than some kind of, dressed up kind of pyramid scheme of what we've seen in the early games in crypto.
All of you is talking about that there is an increase or potentially a possibility to increase retention engagement because of opportunity of asset ownership and then monetizing that. The question is, how do you see true interoperability or composability really playing out across games, across chains? Or are we really packaging an old ecosystem of Android, Google, Facebook into new ecosystem of L1s, non-EVM, all that stuff? So how do you really see it's playing out? While in theory it's fine, but in practicality, since you guys meet so many companies, how do you really see? Vaas, Justin, Shahilesh, whosoever wants to.
There's a few things I think that will not work, or at least have a relatively strong view. I think a lot of early games had land sales. Land is valuable in the physical world because of proximity and saving people time. It has no significant advantage in the digital world. And that perhaps is not a good use of a collectible or a digital asset. Similarly, games without like a real game, like Axie, is not, it's fun for speculation, but when the economic incentives completely overtake the gameplay, it leads the retention will go away. I think like the big risk in all this stuff is just that unless it's a fun thing to play, it's not a game. It's then just purely a financial activity, which is, you can get a lot of that for people who want that just buying, altcoins in crypto. There's enough of that kind of feeling or mania, if you want, but at any given time in some token or the other. What we are optimistic on is just what people who are real game developers build really good games, and they find unique ways of bringing this out, the properties of blockchain.
I agree fully. There's just one very minor segment of the gaming genre space where the financial metagame that I think you alluded to is actually quite interesting, right? So Eve is a good example of this, where your spreadsheets as a game, to sort of command, conquer, explore, exploit as a game mechanic has created just one of the sort of most fascinating games in the space. And I think that is a great mapping of where kind of crypto and open markets could enable it. But again, it's a very small sliver.
Agreed.
But just coming back to my question was, how does really a user benefit or convert an asset ownership into a really unlocking, permissionless unlocking? And how are you seeing an infrastructure really enabling that?
See, I think first thing to appreciate is I feel, through this last 2-3 years, we've been talking a lot about just blockchain games being unusable or just not being user-friendly. I think what we need to appreciate is I think we've come a long way. I think that was almost step one of the barrier to cross, just in terms of where infra is, where the L2s are, what ZKs are doing. And I think we can always say, there are these gaps, whatnot, but I think we've come a long way. So almost coming into the next cycle where we bring in a lot more people into the Web3 world, the tokens world, I feel it's going to be a lot easier just in terms of user experience. So almost that's the first unlock I feel which we have achieved and which today is not so apparent, but I think it'll get more apparent as more games start building on this infra. That is one. Second, I think you spoke about composability. It's, again, like you take a 5-10 year view, it's very imaginable, right? You can very easily see what can get built out. Today, there's a lot of speculative stuff that's happening, but also look at some of these interesting things have happened, right? Where because you own an asset in some game, I'm able to give you a certain privilege in another ecosystem, right? Which could be through a token drop or anything of that kind. That's almost composability 0.5, right? It is saying, I know something there which I wouldn't have known. Like there's no way for you to know in a Web2 game what level you are for another Web2 game, but in a Web3 game, you could know that. So that's almost level 1 composability. Now, what is level 2, level 3? I don't think the problem is imagination. I feel it's just very complex economic design. Like how do you make it happen? Like you have like closed loop economies. When freemium games came about, we took a decade to figure out this closed loop economies, right? Like now you're saying this is this fully open loop economy where assets are freely tradable, this not. So I think we'll take baby steps. To me, even just this knowing what your status is in another game being used by another game or ecosystem, I feel is already a very good step, and many projects are using that. Some well, some not so well. But I think the next big unlock will be when somebody figures out how to make some of these, maybe you don't open up a full economy, you open up some small part. And
is it an economy design problem? Is it an infra problem?
That's what I said. So I think infra has been solved to some extent. Now the other dichotomy in infra is making it easier. We have taken away some openness. I think it's
correct.
The very nature of it. I think there's a utopia world, which is like a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades away. We're taking steps towards that.
So basically a lot of unknowns for startups to pick up and start building and solving.
I would think, see, there's a utopia to build towards, but almost can you find little examples and sort of start building some use cases around it, right? Which is, we spoke about one example. I'm sure there's other interesting way to merge something you own with some other new asset and build something out which is interesting and fun.
Shahilesh, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think like a lot of blockchain or crypto folks hide behind infra or say that infra is not there and that's why it hasn't happened yet. We've had low-cost blockchains and block space for a few years now. Nothing is at all congested.
Yeah.
There's very few real users of any of these things. That's not the concern. Yeah, sure, interoperability could always be better, but
that's not a roadblocker.
It's not a roadblock.
Yep, I agree with you completely.
And interoperability, interestingly enough, if you just look at, you mentioned Android and the mobile OS ecosystems, how it started off quite fragmented and then just coalesced into, I guess, 2 main players now. You see that similar, if you look at the Electric Capital report on the developers and where they're focusing their time, very fragmented when that report first was published across a whole number of protocols, and now slowly coalescing into sort of EVM and non-EVM, and sort of getting to, again, sort of maybe two, three main kind of protocols. That's the one data point. Interoperability, generally, I think that stuff is becoming more and more solved over time. You see the launch of CCIP by Link. I mean, that's an interoperable, like quite a far and good advancement in trying to solve for interoperability. There's also protocols that are doing this, and it's getting better and better over time. I think that stuff gets abstracted away over time, unless there's some sort of tribal affiliation to a protocol. It's just technical kind of back end, really, that I don't think is like the big value add or the unlock, and it'll just get solved over time.
Vaas, I'm just picking up some thoughts from you. You said there's a vast utopian world, and I've been doing gaming for 13 years. This is an utopian world we have been trying to swim. So if you were to sit today and see last 5 years, what was your one or two thesis which you were having very strongly that gaming will play out like in this manner? And what some of the things which you thought would play out have not played out? I think it's always a great reflection to kind of really see and why has not done it. So a question for all of you, and based on your own thesis on gaming of last 5 years, what has not played out?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and I'm talking more gaming here, and we'll intersperse this with what's happened in the blockchain world. I think for the longest time, there was this whole thing about India being more a DAO farm, a MAO farm, and like how much monetization is possible in India. At least for us 5-6 years back, when we look back and said, when we project it out, do we start seeing this market being respectably large? I think it's clearly played out. I feel today, honestly, when I've been picking up a lot of sentiment from the conference, from people I've been meeting, I think there is a very strong belief that just building for the Indian user across different types of games is going to be a very large, substantial outcome, and those are large. And it's also very interesting how these have been led by, in-app purchases, microtransactions, bunch of that stuff, which again, like 5 years back, everybody would write off IAPs and microtransactions in India, where the infra has come, where the user psychology has evolved, how games have been built. I think we've come a very long way on that. So that's something I think which has very, very positively played out. And just today, as we look at, again, the future, it feels almost a no-brainer on how this will play out over the next sort of 5-10 years. What has not fully played out, I feel, is, again, sticking to gaming, I feel we thought India had a lot of stories, types of games, etc., that would get built both for the world and for India. Very interestingly, that hasn't played out. I think there's a lot of rich stuff here which could have been taken and built out. It's played out in a few other geographies. That hasn't truly played out. The other one was also the amount of impact India would have as a powerhouse for gaming for the world. I feel we've had a few very success stories, but again, for the talent and depth we have, I feel that story is yet to play out.
Got it.
Nothing really to add.
Nothing? Justin?
The kind of DAO MAO farm and guild type model, and I guess I've already spoken about that model of time-rich gamers and cash poor, sort of servicing those who are cash-rich. That was, again, an interesting idea. I guess what I was surprised about was, now that these communities and guilds and just huge user bases have been built up, I was quite surprised that there was quite a lack of being able to monetize those communities. I thought it would do a little bit better. I knew the guild model, we had a view that the guild model would struggle, but I just thought that it would really just be able to monetize these players a lot better. But the realization is it was just, I think, a timing issue, again, around the slate of games coming to market. It takes 3 years, 5 years to build really great games. And so I think it really was just a market timing issue. And so I don't want to kind of run back the play to earn model again, but I do think there is something about having people sort of build this depth of an economy. Crypto is really good at economic coordination and coordinating people to do things through incentives. And so I think there is something about having people build this liquidity in an economy that's not just players who are playing for free in a free-to-play economy and monetizing whales. I think there's something about sort of building a much richer, much deeper economy through the various kind of layers or strata of that user base, so that more money and capital flows through that strata base, through that strata, if that makes sense. So, it remains to be seen. Another sort of small point, I've touched on casual games. I thought that mobile games sort of working with any kind of crypto economic primitives would be more prevalent. Of course, the policies from our overlords was not very favorable to that, and that thankfully I think is loosening a little bit. Now, expectation is, I expected after that loosened that more casual studios would incorporate crypto economic tooling, primitives, in order to build ecosystems of casual games, because interoperability with sort of AA, AAA games is very difficult. It's like, I'm not a game builder. You guys are sort of, a lot of people here are operators, can probably attest to this, and this is what I hear. But I thought that it would be easier in casual games, and again, just adding a few basis points to LTV. If you have one kind of puzzle game here, can you transfer assets to another?
And I think there is an example in Web2 skills. Skills demonstrated that. In casual games, how your LTV can improve, and that's what I've done. In the interest of time, guys, Shahilesh has to run for another panel discussion. Any last one question I can take? Yes? Now just pass it on, yeah?
Question actually.
You have a question? तुम्हारा हो गया है? अभी है? चलो, okay.
सिंपल क्वेश्चन है, मतलब वेव 2 क्या, मतलब वेव 3 का एडवांटेज क्या है वेव 2 के ऊपर?
He's asking what is the advantage of Web 3 or Web 2? You want to take it?
How much time do we have?
You have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Elevator pitch.
Yes.
You're not used to giving. You're used to hearing the pitch, not giving the pitch.
No. I want to frame it as the simple. There's a lot of convoluted stuff that people give, but crypto was started. If you go kind of way back, it has very libertarian, anti-authoritarian leanings, and that's the kind of ethos around why this sort of stuff was established in the first place. It speaks to me from a quite authoritarian government not really that great, with a poor currency and that. And so these things align to why I sort of was involved in the industry in the first place. And then you go back to why Ethereum was created, is because Warcraft decided to nerf Vitalik's his Warlock or something like that. And so what are the advantages of all of this is optionality to own your stuff that you've spent so much time in a game, sort of farming, earning, or sort of acquiring. I would give that the simplest answer. There's much sort of more complicated answers around creating deeper economies, much more engaging gameplay, composability and extensibility of sort of moving game state and game logic on chain instead of being run on a single server. But we don't have to get into that right now.
Sure. Okay, thanks, sir.
If you need more detail, please catch him offline. Sorry, there was a gentleman there, and then we will just end the panel. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Murthy. I'm co-founder of Witwit. We are a protocol research and development company. So right now we are building Web3 AI. So I would like to understand, what is the AI adoption for Web3 games? I mean, both in terms of Web2 AI and Web3 AI.
What is the AI application in Web3? That's a good cohort. Vaas, go for it.
See, at least we've been looking at them fairly independently, in the sense there is a whole reason to believe there is a Web3 future for games. And again, it's a long conversation on what AI can do to games, but again, it's very believable just in terms of what's possible, right? Like, I think it's going to start with environments, non-playing characters, then probably get into a little bit of interaction, then you get into the core game loop. Today, both economics wise and tech capability wise, do they feel very real? They feel very real. So at least we do think both these futures will evolve fairly independently. In some way, there's also this forces which pull both away from each other. So we'll have to see a little bit of how those two evolve. But I feel almost the next 2-3 years are both these technologies almost finding their ground, figuring out which parts of the game do they interact and work with, and then we'll have to see how they come together, if at all.
Shahilesh?
I think one idea that's been interesting is that blockchain is being used as an authentication layer for AI assets to know that this was created by a human or created by an algorithm.
Correct.
And a way of authenticating it. And so
Absolutely.
blockchains provide that layer of truth.
That's why the word coin and the Sam Altman started both.
Correct.
I'd also just add, it's payments. Yeah, it's autonomous agents that are able to interact with, with multimodal interactions with the rest of the world. If you have autonomous agents that can do this, the next phase is payments, and you can't, construct an AI model that's going to plug into PayPal or UPI to be able to do this. You need an agent that can put up stake in case anything goes wrong, because you're not going to be able to sue a model or an autonomous agent. And you're going to need some kind of payment mechanism and sort of payment layer that is decentralized, open, permissionless in order to do that. So that's quite far in the future, but I think that's really going to be, aside from sort of authentication, maybe also training models across the world is an interesting application. But in short, it's payments.
Yeah, I think the botting problem which you spoke about and that proof of human is a very, very immediate problem statement also in low-hanging fruit. With that, guys, we come to an end. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys, for being a generous panelist. And please rush to your next panel. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.